Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another episode of Buha's Block. On today's episode, we're going to be covering the state of the Lakers. 10 storylines at the 71 game mark, not exactly 70, but the 70th game happened over the weekend, so decided to wait one more game until doing the latest update. So technically, we're going to be covering the past 11 games, but regardless, this has been a rough stretch for the Lakers. They are just 4-7 over their past 11 games, largely due to injury and somewhat being on the road, but 4-7, 23rd in offense, 23rd in defense, and 22nd in net rating. On the season, they are 43-28, which means they are on pace to go 50-32, and they are currently tied with Memphis for the number 4 seed, though they have the head-to-head tiebreaker currently with Memphis. They also have the division leader tiebreaker, assuming they win the Pacific Division and Memphis does not win the Southwest Division. And then they also have the conference head-to-head tiebreaker. So in terms of them jockeying with Memphis in the standings, it looks like they should be ahead of Memphis if the two teams end up tying. But the Lakers, before this stretch, were on an 8-game win streak and looked like they were potentially going to lock up the 2 seed at some point down the stretch here. And now it's looking like they could very well be in that 4-5 mix and potentially even as low as like 6, depending on how these final 11 games play out. So a lot to cover on today's show with how the last 11 games have gone and some of the trends and developments. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. And a big shout out to a new member of the Buha's Block team, VJ. He helped research and organize a lot of the numbers for today's show. So a big shout out to him, and I really appreciate it. And you'll be hearing more from him and Kevin and Keone moving forward. Those are 3 new members of the Buha's Block team and 3 people I'm very excited to be working with. So storyline number 1 is Luka Doncic's increased offensive comfort and production. And so looking at the month of March, which technically these 11 games are from the March 6th New York game through the March 24th Orlando game. But I'm going to cheat a little bit and just look at the entire month of March for Luka. He's at 31 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists on 43, 43, 79 shooting splits. That 3-point percentage is great. Obviously, the field goal percentage could, of course, be better, and that is dragged down because he's shooting just 44% on 2s in March. And so looking at it over the past 11 games, just 55% in the restricted area, 42% in the paint, in non-restricted paint 2s, 29% in the mid-range. So those are numbers that Luka is going to be, high 30s into low 40s in terms of mid-range jumpers. Restricted area, he's going to be someone who is in the 60s, not someone in the mid 50s. So some of those things have been down this month. Another way Luka should be better is right now, according to NBA.com, he is in the 47th percentile in terms of isolation possessions, and that's factoring in scoring frequency and one frequency, free throw frequency, all that stuff. So he ranks in the 47th percentile. Last season, he ranked in the 83rd percentile, and we know Luka is one of the best ISO players in the league. So that does factor in his Dallas numbers, and that's the cumulative of the season for him. But he is due for some positive regression in ISO sense. And I think you've started to see it over the past couple of weeks, but I think it could go to an even higher level. So whether that hits at the end of the regular season or going into the playoffs, I think that is another area of his game that should bounce back in a meaningful way. But in terms of him scoring more, generating more assists, taking more threes, getting to the free throw line more, those have all been positives. And if you look at his monthly splits this season, his March numbers are right there with his best numbers in Dallas, if not straight up better. If we break it down a little further, he's at 10.9 three-point attempts per game in March. That is a season high for a month. 42.5% on threes. That is a season high for a month. 10.2 free throw attempts per game. That is a season high for a month. His 8.6 rebounds is right in line with most of his months. He had a little bit of a down November in terms of rebounding, but otherwise he's been at 8.5 or more. The 8.7 assists is a high for any month. 1.8 steals is right up there with the rest of the months. Outside of December, he averaged 2.8 per game. The larger point here is that Luka is beginning to resemble the pre-trade version of himself and even outplay the version of himself from earlier this season. I still think there's another level to get to, especially with the finishing at the rim, the mid-range shooting, but he is as involved offensively as he was in Dallas, if not even a little bit higher, especially with LeBron being out during part of the stretch. He is generating more threes. He is generating more assists. He is right there with the rebounding and the steals, and he is getting to the free throw line far more than at any other point this season. And so I know this has been a tough stretch for the Lakers, but if you want to look at the biggest kernel of optimism over the past 11 games, it is the way that Luka has been playing. It is the way that he has looked far more comfortable within the Lakers offense with his teammates and generating shots for them, and just the level of play that he has been at. And again, there are certain things with the finishing, with the mid-range shooting, with the turnovers, and still a bit with the complaining and the technicals that, like, if he could sharpen some of that stuff up, we're talking about a guy who is firmly in the top 3 player conversation. And so if there's one thing that I'm encouraged by over the past 11 games, it is Luka. And the way that I think we saw him shift the offense and generate more threes since arriving in LA. But I think his play was not quite up to his standards. And it's not there yet. And there's still some room for improvement, but he's getting there. Storyline number 2 for me is Austin Reaves continues to rewrite his ceiling. And so I always go back and look and track the evolving storylines of what were the storylines at the 10-game mark, the 20-game mark, 30-game mark, etc. So going back to the 40-game mark, one of my storylines was Austin Reaves has evolved into a true number 3. And so that was 30 games ago, and I thought really after, especially after the D'Lo trade, but even around that time, it was clear, in my opinion, that Austin had elevated into being a true number 3 behind, at the time, LeBron and AD. I think he's taken it to a completely different level where he is one of the best number 3s in the league. I think he's a top 5 number 3, and I think you could argue for him as high as like number 3. Among the number 3s, like he is firmly in that conversation. It really depends who you deem a number 3. Like with Cleveland is the number 3. Like technically offensively, I think the number 3 is more Evan Mobley, but if we're like ranking them in terms of best player, the number 3 is Darius Garland. And so it depends like how you want to distinguish some of these things. But Cleveland, whoever's their number 3, Mobley or Garland, that player's in the mix. Looking at OKC with Chet, looking at Memphis with Desmond Bane, looking at Boston with Derek White, and New York with Mikal Bridges. Like there are some legit number 3s across the league, but I think Austin is near the top of that list. There are a lot of really good number 3s that Austin's just better than. And so when you factor in the isolation scoring, the shooting, the playmaking, the ability to scale up and down, the versatility, like Austin has been incredible this season. We've seen him against Indiana and Denver scale up to be a number 1. We saw during this stretch with LeBron out, him scale up to be a number 2. And we've seen that all season. When AD or LeBron would miss games, Austin would scale up and look pretty good. And of course, small sample size. And I think he is more properly slotted as a number 3, especially next to guys like LeBron and Luka. He has improved every season of his career. He has improved within the season and every season of his career. And I know that with Austin, there's a lot of talk about like, sometimes it feels like because he's always a topic of conversation, he has a certain level of attention, a certain level of hype that can lead to some detractors and people looking at or focusing on what he can't do. But I think it's time to look at what Austin can do. And what he can do is put the ball in the basket, help his teammates put the ball in the basket, and impact winning. And so looking at this 11-game stretch here, he's played in 10 of the 11 games. Remember, a couple of those games were also him coming back from that calf strain that he had, and he did not look like himself. For example, in I think the Boston game, the Brooklyn game, it took him a little bit to get his legs back, get his rhythm back, similar to what we're seeing right now with LeBron and Rui. So again, over the past 11 games, he's played in 10 of them. He is averaging 23 points per game, 6 rebounds a game, 6 assists per game on 47, 37, 91 shooting splits, all good numbers, all above average, to go along with just 2 turnovers a game, 2.3 to be technical, 1.1 steals. And the Lakers have been outscored during this stretch with him on the floor, but that is largely because they've been bad over the past 11 games and been very short-handed. His bag has gone to a different level with the crossovers, the behind the backs, the flair with the passing. I think the step backs, the pull-ups, like he has really been in his element over the last few weeks. And sure, there's some limitations. Defensively, teams will continue to target him. I think Chicago and Orlando in the 2 most recent losses targeted him a bit. But for a number 3, and just when factoring in, players are not robots. There is some human element here. There is some element of guys being tired or banged up or just a basic level of inconsistency. Like Austin has been very stable and consistent for this group. And so whatever you think Austin Reaves' ceiling is, he's going to shatter it because that's just how this dude is built. That's just how he's wired. And that's what he's been doing all season. Storyline number 3 is the new but expected 9-man rotation. So I think if you've been observing JJ's rotation trends and the way that he has used certain guys over the past couple of months, I think this 9-man rotation made sense. It's something that I've talked about on here before. It's something that I've talked about on my post-game streams before. But the current 9-man rotation is Jaxson Hayes, LeBron James, Dorian Finney-Smith, Austin Reaves, and Luka Doncic as the 5 starters, with Rui Hachimura, Gabe Vincent, Jared Vanderbilt, and Jordan Goodwin as the 4 primary bench guys. And for context here, I just want to be clear, we only have a couple of games with this 9-man rotation since Jordan Goodwin has really emerged, since the injuries with Rui and LeBron. The Lakers have not really been whole over most of the past month and a half with Luka. We are now getting to the stretch run here where they are ramping up for the postseason, and JJ is going with a more playoff-like rotation. We know that from the beginning of the season, JJ said he wanted to use a 9-man rotation in the regular season. One would assume that would be probably whittled down to about 8 players, 8.5 maybe in the postseason. And when I say 8.5, it's really like 8 guys and maybe one guy plays like half a shift or 8 to 10 minutes. And that's kind of like a partial rotation player. But looking at who's on the outside of that, the first guy that stands out is Dalton Connect, who right now is the 10th man in the rotation. He did not play rotation minutes in the Chicago game. He only played once the Lakers emptied their bench. And then in the Orlando game, he got 1 shift in the first half, and that was it. He actually made his only shot. He went 1 for 1, hit a 3, but did not play in the second half. So I think he is on the outside looking in because the Lakers have prioritized defense, especially with the bench group looking at, Rui DFS. That's I'm going to put that topic to the side for a second. But Gabe, Vando, and Jordan Goodwin are all banshees. Those are the types of bench players that JJ prefers. And so those guys all fit JJ's vision for the bench and their impact and their style of play. And then with Rui and DFS, that seems to be more of a minutes restriction thing. Rui has played 18 minutes and then 24 minutes in his first 2 games back. JJ's talked about him being on a 20 to 24 minutes restriction. So it seems like for now he's coming off the bench with his reduced role. Rui has said that he is only at about 70 to 80%. JJ said there's no timetable or timeline for when Rui will get back to being 100% or close to it. So that is a bit concerning. And I do wonder if that ultimately keeps Rui in more of a bench role, just given some of his physical limitations and given the restriction with his minutes. But then also looking at it, Christian Koloko and Jemison, who have been battling for that backup center spot, they seem to be more of the 11th man now, and on the outside looking in, barring maybe a shift or something depending on the matchup. So longer term, the two follow-up questions I have to this are, how does the DFS Rui situation play out? DFS has been starting now for almost a month. And at this point, with it being this late into the season, does JJ just stick with that and keep Rui as a bench player? And then the second question is Dalton, and does he play himself into a larger role? Is he situationally used in a larger role? Like we saw again, JJ go to him in the first half against Orlando, didn't go to him in the second half. But I think there will be matchups down the road, potentially Golden State, the Clippers, or Memphis, like teams that you want to target their bigs, or teams that you maybe get into a shootout with. I think Dalton can make more sense than a Goodwin or a Vando, though there is that defense trade-off. So I think there's some fascinating stuff here with the rotation. We do have the right now 9-man rotation. I think it makes sense based on who the Lakers' 9 best players are. I think it makes sense based on the trends with JJ throughout the season, especially more recently. But I still think there are some unsettled questions within that and things to watch over these final 11 games heading into the playoffs. Storyline number 4 is the West playoff race and how much of a bloodbath this is going to be down the stretch for the Lakers. So as things stand, as I mentioned, the Lakers are number 4 in the West right now, tied with Memphis, though they have the head-to-head tiebreaker, both due to the season series, but also because they are the leader of the Pacific Division. And even if they weren't, they also have a better conference record than Memphis. Oklahoma City has run away with the West. They have a 14-game advantage right now in the loss column. No one is catching OKC. They're going to be the 1 seed. Really, their only thing down the stretch here is maintaining a certain level of rhythm, staying healthy, and battling Cleveland for home court advantage in the entire playoffs. So let's put OKC to the side. It's really between Houston, Denver, the Lakers, the Grizzlies, potentially Golden State, the Clippers, and the Timberwolves. All these teams are jumbled together. I do feel like the Clippers and Timberwolves are probably going to be locked into 7 or 8. It seems like 2 to 6 is going to be relatively close. It seems like those are going to be the teams that are in the top 6. And in terms of remaining strength of schedule, the Lakers have the 4th toughest schedule, tougher than any of the other teams in this range. Memphis has the 7th toughest. Denver has the 11th. Houston has the 12th. The Clippers have the 13th. Golden State has the 15th. And Minnesota's all the way down there at 26th. The concern here for the Lakers is that 7 of their final 11 games are on the road. They still have some notable matchups with the Thunder twice, though that may come down to how OKC approaches that, if they're still jockeying with Cleveland for overall home court advantage and how they want to approach those Laker games from a competitive and strategic standpoint. They still got 2 games against the Rockets, 1 game against the Grizzlies, 1 game against the Warriors, and then another game against the Pacers. So, and then that's not even mentioning Chicago, who's won a lot. It just beat the Lakers by 31 on the road, put up a franchise record tying point total in regulation. So the Lakers have a really tough slate here. They're also not playing their best basketball of the season, obviously. They've lost 7 of 10. They're still integrating LeBron and Rui. They have multiple guys dealing with injuries. So if you want to look at the biggest concern right now, it might just be that the Lakers, due to the schedule and due to injuries and the lack of rhythm that they're in right now, might be on the wrong side of this competition and could end up being the 5 seed, the 6 seed, or in a disaster scenario, slipping all the way down to 7 and having to be in the play-in tournament and at least host a play-in game. But they don't want to be in that matchup. You want to be getting some rest. You want to be preparing for your opponent. So for them, the key here, I think, is obviously remaining in the top 6, but still, if there's any way to get at least the top 4 seed and have home court in round 1, even if it puts them on a collision course with OKC potentially. I think ideally they don't play OKC in round 2 and they can stay out of the 4-5 and get the 2 or the 3 seed. But unless they beat, like, I'm really looking at the two Houston matchups head to head. Those are going to be massive. They also play the Warriors. That's going to be a pivotal one to keep the Warriors at bay in terms of trying to catch the Lakers. They're only a couple games back in the loss column. They have another game with Memphis, and it's worth noting 3 of those 4 games are at home. Both Houston games and the Golden State game are at home, where the Lakers have the second best home record in the conference. They're 28-9. Only OKC has a better home record than them. So the Lakers have some say in their destiny here if they can beat these teams head to head. And that is going to be something to watch. Storyline number 5 is Jaxson Hayes' increasing importance. And we knew this because Jaxson is really the only rotation caliber center on the roster. So just by nature of being a 7-foot body, the Lakers need Jaxson, and they missed him when he was out. But we saw when he came back from his injury, the immediate effect he had on the Lakers offense as a pick and roll partner with Luka Doncic, as a vertical lob threat, as a short roll playmaker, and at a minimum, someone who sucks in a defense, someone who draws attention. And you saw after that Phoenix game in the San Antonio game, San Antonio started shifting their defense more toward the paint, more toward taking Jaxson away. We saw Chicago do the same thing. We saw Orlando do the same thing. And one of the benefits of that is it opens up weak side actions. It opens up those skip passes, those kick out passes to the weak side. It opens up these short roll opportunities for Jaxson to hit cutters, to hit shooters. So I think you can't take everything away. And if teams are going to send the low man over and tag Jaxson as a roller, both with like an initial defender and then sometimes even a second defender, that is going to open up other things for the Lakers offense. So again, just by virtue of being a 7-footer who can play at a certain level, he is important to this group. But Jaxson has also progressively been playing better throughout the season. He's shown a lot of growth since I would say like late December, early January. I think that was a bit of a turning point for him. And then the second AD went down, he started playing much better and has grown and looked like a real starting center at times. I think more realistically, he is a good backup. I think that is more of his future in LA or potentially with another team, depending on how this offseason plays out. Like to me, he is a really, really good backup center. And I think he fits within a certain style of offense, a certain style of ball handler, pick and roll partner. But I think he has been awesome lately. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how teams defend him and Luka in the playoffs, and if they are potentially putting a wing on Jaxson, because he's not really going to overpower you. He's not going to post you up or get like deep seals and duck-ins and whatnot. So you can probably put a wing on Jaxson and have that player switch onto Luka and just switch the Jaxson-Luka pick and roll and try to neutralize it that way. But if you don't have that defensive versatility and you have to go with more traditional personnel, I wonder how teams are going to try to stop that, because again, if you're shifting over with the low man, if you're shifting over your weak side help toward Jaxson, loading up the paint, preventing the lob, preventing some of his short roll playmaking, then that is going to open things up, and Luka can't find the corner guy in either corner, or Lakers have that safety valve that is the release guy in case Luka gets doubled, and it's often Austin or it could be LeBron, and you hit that guy and then you trigger the 4-on-3. So Jaxson in his play, I will note he has struggled the last couple of games against Chicago, against Orlando, against bigger, more athletic teams. They have tested him. And I think the Orlando game was his worst game. One of the worst games maybe of the season for him. Certainly one of the worst games he's played since he has had an increased role. I think the other thing with Jaxson is going to be, he is not a good rebounder. He has improved as a rebounder, but I still think in certain matchups, be it against a Zubats, a Zach Edey, Jaren Jackson, potential front line, Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren together, like those types of two big looks or just a really imposing physical force could also be a Jokic, Aaron Gordon front line. The Lakers have rebounded well with the quartet of Jaxson, LeBron, Luka, and AR, which I think is going to be a foundation, certainly with the starting lineup, and how that holds up against bigger front courts, testier front courts, I think will be a key in Jackson's playoff viability and his future with this group, because I think there is a chance that he could be the center of the future for the Lakers, and maybe they just go out and get a better backup and have Jaxson and that player moving forward. But I think you have to see that in a playoff series. You have to see how he holds up, how he fares. We don't have a real sample size with Jaxson in the playoffs with serious minutes. So this will be the first test. And if the Lakers advance multiple rounds, it will be the first and second and third and potentially fourth test for Jaxson. And the Lakers are really going to need him, because if they do not have him, they are almost certainly going to be playing centerless basketball, and they won't be small. They still have some big wings, and I still think they can protect the rim and protect the defensive glass within some of those smaller lineups. But it is a drop off from him to a Christian Koloko, him to a Trey Jemison. I don't even know if those guys are necessarily going to play in the playoffs. I would assume most likely not. I don't view them in the Lakers top 10. So in their top 10, they really have one quote unquote traditional center, if you want to even call Jaxson that. And when he is out or he is not playing well, when he's in foul trouble, but when he's not as effective, when he's being neutralized, you see the way that it impacts the Lakers on both sides of the ball. I think that was the case in the Chicago and Orlando games, and they are going to need Jaxson locked in, playing consistently, playing his best basketball come playoff time. Next storyline for me is the downside to having LeBron and Rui miss so much time. And I think we are seeing that right now following the Chicago and Orlando losses. And this was the thing that when LeBron went out with his injury in Boston, I said was going to be the biggest downside to this entire situation. It was not necessarily the dip in the standings, losing some games that they otherwise would have won had they been healthy, or at least had LeBron. It was going to be the missed opportunities, the missed reps, the missed experience, the missed minutes together with LeBron and Luka, LeBron, Luka, and Austin, LeBron with the starting group, LeBron in closing groups, and just the way that this all works together, the way that the puzzle pieces fit. So I think we've seen it already, where LeBron is obviously not back to being 100% yet. Rui is at, according to him, 70 to 80%. So that's almost its own thing. But I think from an identity perspective, I think from a rhythm and continuity perspective, you've seen the Lakers look out of sorts on both sides of the ball. They have had some good stretches. I think the first half against Chicago and the first half against Orlando were both much better than the respective second halves. But even then, there were certainly some things they could clean up on both sides of the ball. So now that we are in the stretch run here, the things to watch are going to be Rui and just his productivity, and can he get back to being who he was and who this group needs him to be, and how JJ balances needing Rui, but also needing a healthy and productive player that starting group, and potentially just leaning more on DFS. How long does it take for LeBron to look more like himself and for those lineups to be better? How long does it take Rui to look like himself and for those lineups to be better? And the Lakers just don't have much time to figure this out on the fly. And maybe they figure it out this week against Indiana or Chicago or Memphis, or maybe they figure it out next week when they get home for the Houston and Golden State games. It just needs to be soon. Storyline number 7 is shot variance and how that has affected LA over this stretch. And so with LA becoming a higher volume 3-point shooting team, there naturally is an element of shot variance within that. When you take more threes, you're going to have the nights when you hit 15, 17, 20 3-pointers, and you're going to have the nights when you hit 10, 11, 13 3-pointers, and your offense can fluctuate depending on how many threes you are making. And the Lakers rank right now 5th in 3-point attempts per 100 possessions since Luka debuted for them. And that is a far cry from where they were before Luka debuted for them. They are 26th in 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. So going from a bottom 5 3-point shooting team in terms of volume to a top 5 3-point shooting team in terms of volume, that drastically changes the way that your offense functions. It kind of comes down to, are guys like DFS and Gabe Vincent and Rui and Dalton and even Austin, because he's been a catch and shoot guy, especially when playing next to Luka and LeBron. Are those guys making their threes or not? And when they are, the offense looks great. When they're not, the offense doesn't. And the Lakers are susceptible to giving up runs or having these quarters where they don't score very often, especially when you compound that potentially with some higher turnover quarters that they are susceptible to having. Even with Luka and LeBron, those guys are, like I just mentioned, Luka's been shooting 43% on threes in March. LeBron has become a much better shooter later in his career and has had basically his best high volume 3-point shooting seasons in back-to-back seasons now. So there's a certain reliability there. But even for superstars, for high level shot creators, there's a little bit of variance with those guys and their 3-point shooting. So that's another element here of those guys can have off nights from beyond the arc, and that really can harm the Lakers' offensive output for a given game. And then the flip side is the Lakers' defense, where I think we especially saw it against Chicago and against Orlando, where the Lakers are intentional about helping off of certain shooters. They have the guys that they are willing to help off of. The problem has been, for a while there, they were very successful with that strategy, and opponents were underperforming in terms of their shot variance and their expected shot quality. But more recently, that has tilted the other direction, where teams are now starting to hit their expected shot quality or even overexceed it. And that is where things get a little dicey for the Lakers, because you just played back-to-back games against bad shooting teams that had good shooting nights against you. And that was because you were more concerned with trying to shut off the paint and allowing certain guys to get shots. The problem was you did not shut off the paint. They still got to the rim. They still got to the free throw line. And they also generated those high percentage looks. So I don't want to use the last two games as the examples of what the Lakers defense is. I think it's been at a much higher level prior to these last couple games, even with being shorthanded earlier in part of the stretch. So like the defense, I still think there are things they do well. There are things they could do better. And there are some limitations that I think Chicago and Orlando exposed. But overall, the defense should be better moving forward. I think it's not going to be at quite at this level. However, with their style of defense and with it being a more team-oriented defense and not as much on individual stopping per se, that lends itself sometimes to open corner and weak side threes for certain guys. And if they get into a rhythm, then you start to have to close out to them and respect their shot. Then that has its own domino effect. Or if you don't close out and they just continue to make the shots, that also has its own effect, as we saw, I think, more so in the Chicago game. And if you're going to lose to Buzelis and Giddey hitting a bunch of threes, like I understand why you'd rather have that. But you also then have to really make sure you're taking away the paint, which they did not do in both transition and in the half court against Chicago. So like you can't give up everything. They gave up everything against Chicago. I thought they did a better job protecting the paint against Orlando, but they just hit a bunch of runners, floaters, middies, also got to the free throw line a lot, also generated a bunch of threes. And so I think in general, with the way that the Lakers are playing, there's going to be a bit more variance. And that has pros and cons, and we've seen both sides of it recently. Storyline number 8 is the looming two-way decisions. So Jordan Goodwin has one more game of two-way eligibility before he hits his maximum. And so the Lakers have one more game to play him and then decide whether they want to convert him immediately, whether they want to wait a little bit, save some money, and then convert him later in the season. I think based on his play, based on how valuable he is to this group, they should convert him immediately. So the Indiana game would be him reaching that mark, his limit. And I think by the Chicago game on Thursday, they should waive someone and convert him. And I don't have any intel as of right now as to if they are going to do that yet. But I think that would be the shrewd move. I don't think saving a little bit of money and waiting until the end of the season makes much sense. He is going to not play that and lose some rhythm and momentum and reps with the guys. And he is a guy who looks to be in the playoff rotation if the Lakers do convert him, which I think they will. And to kind of waste that just to save some money, it's just it's nonsensical to me. Then there's the matter of Trey Jemison versus Christian Koloko, that battle of who the Lakers think fits better, who makes more sense. I have been on the record as more of a Koloko guy than a Jemison guy. I think either way, I would rather have either player on the roster than Alex Len. And I think that would be the smarter approach for the playoff roster and just building out a potential rotation. Between the two, though, I do lean more Koloko than Jemison. I think he is the higher upside prospect. I think he is the better rim protector. And I think he's played better in bigger games, in my opinion. If you look at his growth throughout the season and just some of his shifts against Denver, against Memphis, against Golden State, I think he has performed better against better teams. He also has played in more games, so I understand that there's a bit of a sample size issue there. Jemison, I thought, played fairly well in those two Clippers games, held up decently in the New York game, but he has tended to play in games against lottery teams when the group has been shorthanded in the front court. And I think just looking at the season-long sample size, I think Koloko has been the better and more impactful player. But again, I think both of them are better than Alex Len. In terms of eligibility for them, this is according to Basketball Reference, which let me down last time with some of their tracking, but I'm giving them a second chance here. It looks like Jemison has 7 games remaining of eligibility and Koloko has 8. So with both of those guys, that will be more of an end of season call in terms of they can play or be active for most of the remaining games, and then the Lakers make that final decision over the final few games. So neither one of those is in jeopardy of running out of games right now. It's only Jordan Goodwin. So again, I think if the Lakers are handling this correctly, Jordan Goodwin should be on the roster by Thursday's game against Chicago or at the latest Saturday's game against Memphis. Money be damned. This is not the time to be trying to save money as you are battling for a playoff seed. And then as this stretch run continues, they can continue to evaluate Jemison versus Koloko and then make that call. Storyline number 9 is mounting injuries. And I've already talked a little bit about LeBron and his groin injury. He also has the foot injury. So that is something that he is going to manage over the final 11 games. You have Rui, who's still trying to play his way back closer to 100%. And I've already touched on that a couple of times in today's show. Luka and his knee and ankle. Austin has a variety of ailments. DFS has his ankle. Gabe has his knee, and Vando has his groin. So I just listed 7 of the top 9 players are dealing with some sort of injury. So as this group tries to recapture their rhythm, and there are potential minutes restrictions or limitations in terms of practices, shoot-arounds, on-court time, they're juggling and balancing all of these things. And they're also trying to keep these guys healthy. So the Lakers have 3 back-to-backs remaining the rest of the season. And I do wonder how they approach those 3 back-to-backs. Looking at the back-to-backs, it's at Indiana, at Chicago. And that one on paper isn't too bad, but then you remember how Chicago just beat the Lakers by 31. Then looking at it versus Golden State, versus New Orleans, that's another one that the front end one is going to be really tough with Golden State and how they're playing. New Orleans should be a winnable game, even if they're not at full strength. And then at OKC, at Dallas. The at Dallas, the big Luka return game is on the second night of a back-to-back, and you would assume he plays in that one. So you wonder how they approach OKC and Dallas in consecutive games. Like they probably just have to play through it and try to win both those games. But that is going to be something to monitor over these final 11 games. So as the Lakers are battling for seeding and trying to win as many games as possible, trying to recapture the magic and the rhythm and the momentum that they had as recently as a couple weeks ago, they are still trying to keep everybody healthy. They are still managing varying workloads and limitations and restrictions and all this stuff. So that is something that is another wrinkle here that just makes this all a bit tougher for them. And then the 10th and final storyline for the Lakers at the 71 game mark of the season is playoff matchups. And I think it is time to start thinking about playoff matchups and how the Lakers fare, at least in round 1, because we still don't know. The West standings are far from settled. And so when looking at like what the Lakers have struggled with more recently, it's been athletic teams and teams that have a certain level of ability to get to the rim, ability to hit contested mid-range jumpers, over-the-top shot making and athleticism and speed. And I think a couple of teams that stand out with this are Houston and to a lesser extent, Memphis and Minnesota with Ja and with Ant. Clippers and Kawhi, there's some over-the-top shot making, but they don't quite have that athleticism to put a lot of pressure on the rim, to put a lot of pressure at the free throw line. Golden State is a bit of a wild card here. I'm really interested to see how these teams look on April 3rd when they end up playing each other. And that's going to be the big thing for me down the stretch here is the Lakers have already played the Nuggets. They're done with the Nuggets. They're done with the Clippers. They're done with the Timberwolves. But they still play Golden State. They still play Memphis. And they still play Houston, as aforementioned. And with those three teams in particular, I think those can be trying matchups for LA, given some of the speed and athleticism on the perimeter with those teams. And I am going to be just fascinated by how those games go, how the Lakers look, how they hold up defensively against those teams. With Houston, I think there's real questions about their shot creation in the half court, their late game offense, and their rim protection with Şengün as the primary rim protector. With Memphis, I think there's some offensive questions for them, some shot making questions for them. And I think they don't match up great with the Lakers on the perimeter in terms of guarding LeBron and guarding Luka. With Golden State, LeBron has destroyed their small ball looks in recent seasons. And I don't know, like maybe they put Jimmy on him, but then who's guarding Luka? I would assume it's probably Draymond on LeBron and Jimmy on Luka. But Luka has also had his fair share of success against Golden State. Then with the Clippers, I think there's like Lakers, Luka loves playing against Ivica Zubac. They also have several guys that they can pick on defensively, be it a James Harden, Bogdanovic, even guys like Amir Coffey, like LeBron was picking on in the last Lakers-Clippers games. Minnesota, they got the size, they got the athleticism, but the shooting is a bit shaky. We saw what Luka did to Rudy Gobert last playoffs, and there's some questions there. But down the stretch here, with several games against several of these teams and these standings seemingly changing every night, one thing that I'm going to be monitoring closely is the Lakers' playoff path, who they are matched up against, and how they match up against that team, the strengths, the weaknesses. And I still think that Denver and Golden State, to me, are going to be the two toughest matchups in the West for LA. Golden State, because they got Steph, a true number two, and I think they have some small ball looks that can be pretty effective. There's also just that level of shooting and also some familiarity between Steph, Draymond, and Steve Kerr with LeBron and Luka to a lesser extent. And then Denver, Jokic, it's seeming like they'll probably have home court over the Lakers in a potential series. And it's still like, we've only seen one real game with those two sides fully healthy. And I think it will be a bit different in a 7-game playoff series. Then Houston and Memphis are very athletic and young, but there's also like Memphis has more experience than Houston, but I still have concerns about the offensive ends. And so, as always in the West, there are a lot more questions than answers. I'm intrigued to see how the Lakers fare in some of these must-win West games and just the matchups, the chess match and the game planning on both sides, just how that goes and what that indicates about the Lakers' playoff aspirations. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow night after Lakers Pacers. I will talk to you then.